Hey, what's going on guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'm going to be comparing the Reebok Nano X3 to the Adidas Dropset Trainer 2. So 5 major differences to note about these shoes is number 1, their midsoles and how that's going to interact with your training. So in the Reebok Nano X3, you have the Float Ride Energy Foam midsole throughout the entirety of the shoe. This midsole is pretty dang consistent throughout from the heel up here to the forefoot. It's pretty responsive and you could train heavy in this shoe. So it has this nice medium density feel to it, so it works for a little bit of everything. In the Adidas Dropset Trainer 2, you have a dual density midsole, which means up here in the forefoot, it's a little bit more responsive and flexible, and then back here in the heel, it's a little bit more dense. This gives this shoe this weird like dual feeling when training. So up here in the forefoot, it doesn't feel as stable and as dense, but back here in the heel, you can really load that and it's not gonna compress a ton. With the lower stack height in the Adidas Dropset Trainer 2 up here in the forefoot though, you don't have to worry about compression of that midsole in my opinion, especially for your heaviest training sessions. The second difference is their stack height. So in the Adidas Dropset Trainer 2, you have a slightly lower stack height throughout, especially through the forefoot. Now, they are pretty similar when it comes to their heel thickness and their heel stack height, but the Adidas Dropset Trainer 2 is gonna take the edge a little bit there. So if you're somebody that wants to get a little bit closer to the ground and have a bit more ground feel, I feel as though the Dropset Trainer 2 does give you that a little bit more. It doesn't feel as built out and the outsole isn't as thick in the Reebok Nano X3. And now that takes me into my third difference, which is the outsoles and their construction. So over here in the Reebok Nano X3, you have a full rubber outsole, and this outsole is pretty thick. So once it breaks in, it gets a little bit more pliable, but overall you do get good traction with this outsole, and it is a little bit more built out and heavy in nature compared to the outsole used in the Dropset Trainer 2. In the Dropset Trainer 2, this rubber feels a little bit more lightweight. You also have this cutout here for ventilation going into the midsole and to the footbed of the shoe, so you do get a bit more breathability in this model. And overall, the outsole I think helps kind of feed into this shoe's ability to be a little bit more pliable and flexible, and it feels very lightweight. Now I will say, in the context of durability between these outsoles and their differences, both can kind of have areas where they fall short. I have found that in both shoes, if you train outside on concrete and you're doing a lot of like multi-directional work or a lot of friction focused activities like sled drags, both these outsoles can be a tiny bit problematic. In the Dropset Trainer 2, your outsole can fade up here in the forefoot. Mine is starting to fade a tiny bit, but like I have put a lot of work into these shoes, and honestly, the grip hasn't failed me yet in the gym, so not necessarily the biggest deal, but definitely something to keep an eye on if you train outside a lot. In the Reebok Nano X3, I have found that you could start to have this chip away a little bit, or the outsole can start to lip, so definitely keep an eye on that. I don't think it's gonna be a major issue for some because those are typically more one-off cases, but there are areas in the context of training outdoors that could cause problems with both of these shoes' durability. The fourth difference to note about these models is their upper constructions and how that feels on the foot. So over here in the Adidas Dropset Trainer 2, you have a mesh and textile upper. It's a lot more breathable and you get more ventilation in the shoe. Plus you do have that ventilated cutout here in the midsole of the bottom of the shoe. But if you're wanting a model that's a little bit more lightweight and doesn't feel as bulky on the foot, that is where the Dropset Trainer 2 is gonna feed more into your ass compared to Reebok Nano X3, because in the Nano X3, you have a flex weave upper with textile overlays, and it just feels a lot heavier. The Nano X3 just feels a bit more built out or structured compared to the Dropset Trainer 2 regarding its upper, and now that could be both a good and bad thing depending on what you want out of your shoes. But if you want a shoe that has a lighter weight upper, go Dropset Trainer 2, because the Nano X3's upper can feel a little bit thick and heavy at times. Plus you do have this lift and run chassis system, which is this plastic TPU layer that extends from the midfoot around the heel, and that adds a little bit more bulk to the boot of this model. The fifth major difference to note about these models is their width. I think for the first time ever, the Adidas model actually feels wider than the Nano model. So in the Dropset Trainer 2, you have an anatomical toe box and it has a little bit less of a taper to it. And now what I think really gives this shoe a slightly wider feeling is that upper construction and how you do have a good level of volume through the shoe, but it also stretches pretty well around the foot once you start to break them in. In the Nano X3, this upper is a little bit more rigid once again and heavy, so it doesn't necessarily stretch as easily. Also, it's not as wide as models like the Reebok Nano 2.0 and some of the older Nanos that we've come to love for their more anatomical or rounded toe box. So compared to the Dropset Trainer 2, I do feel like the Nano X3 actually feels a little bit more narrow. Granted, like I have an E-width foot, they both fit me fine, but I do feel like I get a little bit more space and room in the Dropset Trainer 2. But all that said, let's talk about some performance differences between these models. All right, so now let's talk about how these shoes compare in the context of lifting. So if you're looking for a training shoe strictly for lifting, which model should you go with? I'm gonna give the edge to the Dropset Trainer 2, and that's for two reasons. Number one, this model has a lower stack height. So in my opinion, you get a little bit more ground feel in the shoe when catching cleans, when doing any form of like dynamic explosive lifting. And then also, number two, you have less toe spring in this model. So when it comes to deadlifts or anything where you want a little bit more of that toe pressing into the ground, it's easier to do so in the Dropset Trainer 2 compared to the Nano X3. You get a bit more toe spring in this model, and while you can train really heavy in the Nano X3, I feel like the Dropset Trainer 2 is more of like your traditional like weightlifting shoe feel in the context of a training shoe. So if that's something you're after, I think you'll resonate with this model a lot, and I like the density of this midsole. You can train very heavy in this shoe, and you're not gonna have compression whatsoever. Now granted, I have squatted and deadlifted a lot in these models, and I haven't had any glaring issues, so if you are more leaning towards the Nano X3 and you wanna use them for heavy lifting, you should be fine doing so. They're gonna be pretty stellar, but I do think if you are only wanting that training shoe for lifting specifically, the Dropset Trainer 2 is the stronger model. Now, which model is better for CrossFit? And so this is where I've gone back and forth a lot because I like both of these shoes, but for different reasons. With the Nano X3, it feels very well rounded. So in different WODs where you're gonna be doing short runs, heavier lifts, explosive work, this model has performed really well. With that lift and run chassis system, it gives the shoe a bit more runability compared to like a Metcon 9, compared to the Dropset Trainer 2. So if you want that model that's a little bit more well-rounded, the Nano X3 can be a great option. And then the Dropset Trainer 2, it's not necessarily designed for CrossFit. Like Adidas doesn't exclusively say, this is a CrossFit shoe. However, I have found them to work exceptionally well. And so what I would say is that if you're looking for that CrossFit shoe that has a bias towards lifting and being really good for heavier training, and you're not necessarily worried about the runability and the versatility of that model, the Dropset Trainer 2 can excel a ton. These have yet to break down on me also on rope climbs and whatnot, so I think they should be good for most. However, once again, keep in mind, they're not necessarily designed for CrossFit, so take that with a grain of salt. But both shoes are great. If you want a little bit more versatility, go with the Nano X3. If you want a lifting bias, go Dropset Trainer 2. Now, which model is better for versatile training? This is where I also go back and forth because from a pure versatility standpoint, the Nano X3 I think gives you a little bit more. Plus, they do have a more rigid upper, so for multi-directional work, if you like more ankle support and more lateral support in the sidewall of your shoe, these have worked exceptionally well. The outsole grips really well, and again, they are a bit more runnable, so they can also feel more comfortable for sprints, interval runs, and then also workouts where you're doing a lot of plyometrics. The Dropset Trainer 2, I like in the context of versatile training where you're gonna be doing more athletic focused work. So let's say you're blending a power clean with a broad jump or a box jump, and you're doing like single leg work, that's where this shoe is going to excel. It's not gonna be the best for like sprints and multi-directional work in my opinion, but it can work for those contexts. And the reason I don't recommend them for that though is because of the heel. It juts out a little bit and it can feel a little bit uncomfortable. But if you're gonna be primarily on the forefoot, for example, sprinting and whatnot, this shoe should be plenty fine. So when it comes to versatile training, both models work really well. I think with your versatile training, if you're gonna be doing a lot of jumping and short runs in your workouts and you're doing more of like a hybrid style training session in the context of versatility and cross training, the Nano X3 works exceptionally well. And if you're more of that athlete that plans to lift heavy, be powerful, and do more explosive work, the Dropset Trainer 2 should fit your needs really well. Now, which model is better for short runs? That is where it's a little bit more clear. The Nano X3 is gonna be your better option with the Dropset Trainer 2. These work for sprints and like intervals from 400 to 800 meters. Basically any form of running where you're gonna be more on the forefoot, this shoe can work. However, with this heel being a little bit more dense and the fact that it does come out a little bit, it's not the most comfortable for longer distance runs. So for example, if you wanna tack on like 2 or 3 miles pre or post workout and you're planning to run a little bit slower and you have a heel strike, that's where the Dropset Trainer 2 can get a little bit uncomfortable. But for forefoot running, it should work just fine. Now the Nano X3 with that lift and run chassis system, even though the heel comes out a little bit, there is a bit of a beveling, and with that lift and run chassis plate in there that kind of compresses, it gives this shoe a bit more bounce and it just feels more forgiving. So if you are wanting to tack on 1, 2, even 3 miles pre or post workout, and you don't mind a slightly denser midsole, this can be a slightly better hybrid shoe when it comes to short runs and lifting all in a singular workout. And that's also why I recommend this model for folks who are gonna be doing things like CrossFit WODs and they want that shoe that has a bias or at least more comfort for short runs programmed in those workouts. Now, which model is better for daily wear? Both these shoes can be okay, and for different reasons. So the Dropset Trainer 2, I've actually worn a lot for daily wear. Is it the most comfortable shoe? Not necessarily, but I do like the breathability and I like the wider toe box. It's pretty comfortable across the board. Now, would I wear this as my primary training shoe if I'm traveling and I can only bring one shoe? Not necessarily. I'd probably go with a different model compared to both of these two, like the Strike Movement Haze Trainer or the Rad 1. But overall, it can work for daily wear if you want a shoe just for wearing out and about for running errands and then to the gym here and there. The Reebok Nano X3 I think can also be a really great pick for daily wear. It's going to give you a little bit more comfort overall, and I do like the colorways of the Nano X3 regarding how they can kind of look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing when it comes to daily wear context. Now I will say with the heavier upper in the shoe, it doesn't have the most breathability, but I think if you wear the right socks and if you are in hotter climates, that can kind of offset that. But overall, both these shoes can work for daily wear. However, the Nano X3 will be a little bit more comfortable. And now that all said, if you do want both these shoes to last a little bit longer, you might want to limit their use for daily wear, but if I had to pick one that kind of takes the edge overall, I think the Nano X3 would win here. So when it comes to the price of the Nano X3 versus the Dropset Trainer 2, you can expect to pay around $140 to $150 USD for the Nano X3, depending on the colorway that you go with. And then in the Dropset Trainer 2, you can expect to pay $130. Now, which model goes on sale more often? Honestly, both kind of do. And I feel like if you could knock down the price of either of these shoes between like $110 to $120, even $130 for the Nano X3, I feel like both these shoes are pretty dang worth it regarding their price points. In the context of the sizing and fit of the Nano X3 versus the Dropset Trainer 2, I think most folks should be safe going true to size in these models. So these are both size 10s and they are both pretty dang true to size regarding their length. And now when it comes to width, I think the Dropset Trainer 2 feels a little bit wider and it's not as aggressive with the taper of the toe box. I have an E-width foot. Both shoes fit me really well. However, I do feel like I get a bit more room in the Dropset Trainer 2. So if you do have a wider foot and you want to err on the side of being cautious, I would say probably go with the Dropset Trainer 2. And now what I would say is if you have an exceptionally narrow foot and you typically have a good amount of room at the end of your toe box, you may want to size down a half size in the Nano X3 just because it can run a little bit stiff and I don't want you to have heel slip issues. But overall, I think most folks should be safe going true to size in both of these models. All right, so now let's break down the weight, heel toe drop, and insole in these options. So for my Nano X3 here, for my size 10, we have a weight of 13.85 ounces. Over here in the Dropset Trainer 2 for my size 10, we have a weight of 9.85 ounces. So if you're big on the weight of your shoes and you like the lighter weight shoe option on your foot, go with the Dropset Trainer 2. It's gonna give you a much lighter feel compared to the Nano X3. When it comes to the heel to toe drops, the Dropset Trainer 2 has a 6mm heel to toe drop and the Nano X3 has a 7mm heel to toe drop. Both these shoes also have thin foam removable insoles that you can take out and put in your own insoles with. However, I will say, I do feel you get a tiny bit more upper volume in the Dropset Trainer 2. So if you do have your own insoles, that might be the slightly better option to go with. However, I think both these shoes should accommodate thinner insoles pretty dang well. All right, now let's break down the construction of the Dropset Trainer 2 versus the Nano X3. On the upper of these shoes, in the Nano X3, you have that flex weave upper. You have a little bit of a toe guard on the internal part of the shoe, and then you have textile overlays that extend into the midfoot here. Looking at the heel, you have this lift and run chassis system, so that's this TPU layer that extends from the midfoot and wraps around the heel. It gives this boot a little bit more padding. Looking at the Dropset Trainer 2, you have a mesh and textile upper, so up here through the forefoot and midfoot, you have a good amount of breathability, and then textile overlays going from the midfoot into heel back here. You also have this external tab here to help pull this shoe on. This can be kind of annoying though, so if this does bother you, I would say don't be afraid to kind of cut it off if you're down to kind of risk that with your shoe, because again, it can kind of rub in certain contexts. Looking at the midfoot construction in both of these shoes, over here in the Nano X3, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eyelets that go up with a 7th back here for lace lock. The tongue itself has 2 additional loops for security, and the tongue is a thin padded mesh, and it doesn't have a gusset. However, I do feel like the tongue in this model does stay pretty secure. It can slide at times though, so definitely keep that in mind and keep an eye on how you're placing that tongue when you're lacing the shoe and putting them on. In the Dropset Trainer 2, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eyelets that go up, and then you have 2 additional eyelets back here for adjusting the laces in the shoe. You have a singular loop here, and then you also have a gusset in this model with a padded mesh tongue. Looking at the midsole in both of these shoes, you have a float ride energy foam that extends the entirety of the Nano X3, and then you have rubber overlays here on the lateral and medial side. That is for additional rope climbing support and durability support. Looking at the Dropset Trainer 2, you have that dual density midsole once again. So up here in the forefoot, this material is a little bit more plush and it has a lower stack, track height, and then back here in the heel, it's a little bit more dense and doesn't really compress. You also have these additional overlays here on the lateral and medial side to help give you additional support, and this actually does do a pretty good job at biting ropes in the context of CrossFit WODs. Looking at the outsoles in both of these shoes, you have a full rubber outsole in the Dropset Trainer 2, and then you have a cutout here for additional ventilation. This breathes pretty well, and then when you take out the insole, you actually have some ventilation on the insole as well, and that's what helps keep this shoe a little bit lighter as well, because you are taking out a good chunk of the material right here, where it's typically thickest in most training shoes. Looking at the Reebok Nano X3, you also have a full rubber outsole, and you have some grooves here that go from the midfoot into the forefoot. It helps with the break-in process of this shoe, and then once again, this outsole does wrap up a little bit on the lateral and medial side, and then this model does have that removable insole as well. But overall, I think those are like the nuts and bolts of these shoes constructions that are worth noting in the context of performance and durability. If you have additional questions on the constructions of these shoes, drop a comment down below. All right guys, that wraps up my breakdown of the Nano X3 versus the Dropset Trainer 2. Both these shoes can be solid within their own rights for different reasons. I think if you're wanting that training shoe specifically for lifting, the Dropset Trainer 2 can be an awesome option. And then if you want a shoe with a bit more versatility and a bit more runability, go with the Nano X3. If you have additional questions on either of these models, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, drop subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.